We have Julie Morris. She's going to present to us about the proposed establishment of the Southwest Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Area. This presentation is to inform us of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service effort to establish a Southwest Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Area. How does this reflect the CCMP? Relates to fish, wildlife, and habitat protection. It supports the permanent conservation of environmental sensitive land and critical habitat areas through land acquisition and conservation easements held in perpetuity, including the wetlands, freshwater wetlands, flowways, corridors, and uplands adjacent to the coastal habitats necessary for habitat resilience and migration. So with that, Julie, you have the floor.
Thanks, you all. I really appreciate it. And can you just give me 1 minute? I have a dog that's barking. I have to put him outside. I'm so sorry. Give me 30 seconds.
Okay, you got it.
Okay, I'm back. The joy of virtual presentations. Thanks for having me. I am Julie Morris, and I'm representing both Florida Conservation Group and the National Wildlife Refuge Association. These two groups have formed a partnership to complement their respective state and federal work. So I appreciate you having me. I'm here to talk about the proposed Southwest Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Area. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is proposing to establish a conservation area within Southwest Florida. This would enable the service to protect environmentally sensitive lands by working with willing landowners through strategic acquisition. Can you do the next slide? So the area outlined in black there in Southwest Florida, that's the study area that we're working within. The area north of Lake Okeechobee, outlined in purple, that is the Everglades Headwaters National Wildlife Refuge and Conservation Area. When the headwaters, I'm just going to call Everglades Headwaters, National Wildlife Refuge Headwaters for short, when that was rolled out about 10 years ago, it was part of the Greater Everglades Protection Initiative. An expanded Panther National Wildlife Refuge and the establishment of a Fishing Creek National Wildlife Refuge were envisioned not to be far behind. So Headwaters was envisioned as the first conservation area, and then the service had plans to establish a Fishing Creek Refuge and expand Panther. Just a bit of background for those that are not aware, the Everglades Headwaters encompasses approximately 1 million acres north of Lake Okeechobee. The Fish and Wildlife Service has the authority to purchase 50,000 acres of fee simple, that's outright land purchases, and then 100,000 acres less than fee or conservation easements. So the service has been working within that boundary to purchase both fee and less than fee lands for the past 10 years. And we assist, part of our work is assisting the service to identify the most strategic pieces for acquisition. So that acquisition boundary simply enables the service to work within that area and on land protection. So as I was saying, the Panther Refuge and Fishing Creek Refuge were envisioned not to be far behind that, but then as everything, politics and priorities changed, and that was shelved. In the meantime, U.S. Fish and Wildlife changed their protocols and required that a landscape conservation design be accomplished before or developed before any future expansion efforts. So a landscape conservation design, or LCD, simply provides the biological justification for refuge expansion or new refuge areas. So my organizations worked with University of Florida, Dr. Tom Hochter, to establish an LCD for Southwest Florida in 2015 and 16. The service at that time was thinking, okay, we would be able to work then on Panther Refuge expansion and Fishing Creek. So we developed an LCD in 2015 and 16. And then because politics and changes, that was shelved again. Now with the Biden administration, that was dusted off, and they were looking for priority areas throughout the country on where they could focus planning and acquisition efforts. And Southwest Florida rose to the top, partially because of the tremendous planning work that's been done in this region, which many of you have been involved in over the years, and partially because of the biological diversity and the great amount of threat that we have in Southwest Florida. So Southwest Florida, out of the entire country, rose to a prominent position that DOI, Department of Interior, wanted to focus on for land protection. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife decided to renew their efforts in their region. Because of land use changes, new data, new conservation efforts, and political shifts, all of this warranted a new landscape conservation design. So for the past 2 years, the Refuge Association, Florida Conservation Group, and University of Florida have worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife to develop a landscape conservation design and then a land protection strategy for Southwest Florida. This was approved by U.S. Fish and Wildlife in June of 2022, and here we are. So now we have a Southwest Florida study area that is the basis for planning efforts in the region. This study area is not an acquisition boundary. This study area is simply an area that we examine ecological priorities and how they bleed across the landscape to justify further refuge and conservation area expansion. So we have a study area, and through the planning efforts that we're now engaged in, an acquisition boundary will be developed through a land protection plan. So can you do the next step, the next slide? So I briefly wanted to give some background on what's the difference between a national wildlife refuge and a conservation area. In a nutshell, national wildlife refuges are concentrated areas that are primarily under fee simple ownerships. U.S. Fish and Wildlife allows for public use, staffed facilities, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife is over the land management of those areas. So an example would be in our region, Ding Darling is a national wildlife refuge. A conservation area is more primarily focused on conservation easements, although fee simple acquisition is still a component. And then, as you all know, conservation easements, a landowner maintains ownership and is responsible for management. It's a designated area, and the focus is on collaborative conservation with partners. So what we've been doing in Headwaters, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has an agreement with FWC, and anything that U.S. Fish and Wildlife purchases fee simple, FWC manages the recreation on that area. So while U.S. Fish and Wildlife fee simple purchases are managed as WMAs. That's the example of a type of conservation partnership that we engage in conservation areas. So in a nutshell, think of refuges as more of a concrete area under fee simple public ownership, and conservation areas are more focused on conservation easements and partnerships. Next slide. So where we are right now, the establishment of a new National Wildlife Refuge unit. We've been working on a landscape conservation design for the past 2 years, or it was approved a year ago. And then we developed a land protection strategy, which was a further step in the planning process. The director of U.S. Fish and Wildlife approved both the LCD and the LPS, the land protection strategy. And the next phase is detailed planning. And the proposed conservation area was announced in March. And for the past month, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has been engaged in public outreach, and they've conducted several public meetings to get the public's input on if a new conservation area is desired and warranted, and then what people would like to see. Would they like to see it be more of a conservation easement focus? Would they like to see it be more of a fee simple focus, or a combination of both? And especially what do people, the community, what do they want an acquisition boundary to look like? So an acquisition boundary is simply it will be a subset of that study area. So the service has received input and deadlines were due. The deadline was April 18th on what the conservation, landowner, sportsman, political, general public, what they would like to see in a conservation in a conservation area. So comments were received in April, and now we are working on developing a land protection plan. That land protection plan will go out again for public comment in the fall. And if that is approved by the director, a National Wildlife Refuge and conservation area, or just a National Wildlife Refuge or just a conservation area, will be approved hopefully sometime in December. So because this is such a priority for the administration, this is going through a fairly quick process. So where we are right now is in the detailed planning phase. Next slide. So this is the LCD study area. This is the area that we are looking at, and a future conservation area would be a subset of this area, or it could overlap the entire area. Again, you see Everglades headwaters outlined in orange, and we are working within this study area here. And this study area incorporates the Western Everglades, Caloosahatchee River, Fish Eating Creek, Peace River, and the Myakka River watersheds. And again, our LCD document provides a scientific analysis for justification to further explore the needs for a conservation area. As we all know, Southwest Florida has a tremendous suite of biological resources, and it's under significant threats from development and land use change. It also plays a very important role in the ecological integrity of both the Everglades and the Charlotte Harbor watersheds. And probably most importantly, opportunities still exist to conserve large working and natural landscape. So can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so next slide. So this initiative complements state efforts. The green here depicts the Florida Wildlife Corridor. The Florida Wildlife Corridor is simply the top 3 priorities within the Florida Ecological Greenways Network, which was developed by Dr. Tom Hochter at University of Florida over 20 years ago. And the FEGN, or Florida Ecological Greenways Network, is a series of wildlife corridors that identifies the best options for connectivity in the region. So the Florida Wildlife Corridor is the top 3 priorities within the FEGN, the Greenways Network. And the Florida Wildlife Corridor has received a tremendous amount of attention the past 2 years and a tremendous amount of funding. So both Florida Forever and Rural and Family Lands, our 2 state land protection programs, have dedicated a tremendous amount of funding towards protecting lands in the Florida Wildlife Corridor. As you can see, the Florida Wildlife Corridor and our study area have a great deal of overlap. So an established conservation area would complement state efforts because of mutual priorities. So this is another mechanism to protect the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Next slide. This slide simply shows us where existing properties are that are on the state list for land protection. So the brown are the properties in brown are properties that are on the Florida Forever list, and the properties in purple are the properties that are on the Rural and Family Lands Protection list. And for those of you that don't work with these programs, Florida Forever is our state land acquisition program under DEP. Florida Forever purchases both fee and less than fee, both public lands and conservation easements. The Rural and Family Lands Protection Program is under FDACS, the Florida Department of Agriculture, and that program focuses on protecting agriculturally important lands and agricultural easements. So the easements under Rural and Family Lands Protection Program are a bit more flexible than Florida Forever. Florida Forever is focused on protecting our intact natural resources. The Rural and Family Lands Protection Program is focused on protecting our agriculturally important lands and also natural resources. And this is important because U.S. Fish and Wildlife works with both of these programs to leverage funding. And there simply is not enough funding on a state level for both rural and family lands and Florida Forever to purchase everything we need. And this map is probably about 6 months old now. And Florida Forever is constantly, every 6 months, is adding new projects. So Florida, the desire of landowners right now to sell their land fee simple or less than fee to the state is very, very high. So Florida Forever is receiving an unprecedented amount of applications. So in 6 months, I'll have a new map here that shows even more lands on the Florida Forever list. And Rural and Family Lands has not opened an application period since 2017. So they'll be opening one up fairly soon. And they are expecting an onslaught of applications for that program. So establishing a conservation area would enable U.S. Fish and Wildlife to leverage funding with both of these programs, because even though we've been receiving a tremendous amount of state funding for the past few years, it simply is not going to be enough to protect everything that is needed, that is needed to achieve our conservation goals. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife has had great success in Everglades headwaters to leverage funding with both of these programs. And that means working side by side in these large landscapes and on large pieces of property to protect these lands together, both on fee projects and less than fee conservation easements. So as you can see, our study area right now overlaps with many state priorities. Next slide. So right now we are developing a land protection plan. And a land protection plan simply outlines and prioritizes the region. And it will identify potential public uses, what kinds of public uses are going to be allowed. It will identify an acquisition boundary, and it will identify land acquisition methods. And that is, that I don't know of another word besides calling it like the Bible of a conservation area. So a land protection plan, or LPP, is what is being developed right now. The service had asked for input on the LPP, and that was due on April 18th. We are in the process of developing that now. I am on the planning team, so I would still like to encourage people that have not had an opportunity to comment or have ideas or concerns to reach out. If you're interested, we'll be working on that for the next several months, and people will have an opportunity to provide public comment again in the fall. And if you'd like to be on our mailing list, please let me know, because we are keeping the conservation community updated on what's happening. So next slide. Really quick, what is an acquisition boundary? An acquisition boundary, which will be developed as part of the LPP, will be a subset of that LCD area. It's a specific geographic area, and it will facilitate the service having a seat at the table to work with willing landowners. It's important for folks to know that an established acquisition boundary, an established conservation area will give the service the same ability as Florida Forever, Rural and Family Lands Protection Program, NRCS, Water Management Districts, county acquisition programs. U.S. Fish and Wildlife cannot work on land protection in a region without an established acquisition boundary. So that is what we are working on now. An established conservation area and acquisition boundary will enable U.S. Fish and Wildlife to have a seat at the table to work with willing landowners. And I should mention that this is a willing landowner program. Eminent domain is not a part of it. This is not a regulatory program. The National Wildlife Refuge System is a completely different component to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service than Ecological Services. Ecological Services is focused on permitting. The National Wildlife Refuge System is focused on land protection. So this is a non-regulatory willing seller program similar to our state programs. Next slide. Potential federal funding sources are the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or LWCF. This provides the majority of funding for national wildlife refuges and conservation areas. The North American Wetlands Conservation Fund, Conservation and Mitigation Banks, Habitat Conservation Plans, Partners for Fish and Wildlife, the Migratory Bird Conservation Fund, and federal partner agency programs such as the WRE program and Department of Transportation. But most importantly, what U.S. Fish and Wildlife can do is leverage funding with other entities. So this enables us to stretch our dollars further and maximize our conservation footprint. And they've achieved tremendous success doing that within the Everglades Headwaters National Wildlife Refuge and Conservation Area. Next slide. So the timeline right now, we are working on the land protection plan this summer and fall. That will go back out for public comment this fall, and people will have an opportunity. There will be public meetings to comment on that land protection plan. We'll be developing the final documents, and hopefully we will receive, when I say we, I'm just talking about the global conservation community and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we will receive approval for that hopefully in December, January of 2024. And then the refuge and conservation area will be established when that first land is protected. And the aspirational goal is to have that be in January of 2024. So if you can take off the slides, I can move back to video. So there's just a number of things I wanted to comment on before we open this for questions. And these are the basic messages. And Jennifer, Nicole, I'll send these to you if you want to disseminate this to the committee. This is what our messaging has been with other nonprofits, the landowner community, the sportsman's community, and our decision makers in Tallahassee. This is a complement to state efforts to protect the Florida Wildlife Corridor and other critical components for, our mutual conservation goals, our green infrastructure. This simply allows U.S. Fish and Wildlife to be a player at the table, the same as the state, the same as NRCS, the same as local acquisition entities. U.S. Fish and Wildlife cannot purchase land fee simple or less than fee without an approved acquisition boundary. This gives landowners options. Different agencies have different criteria. They have different components to their conservation easements. Landowners actually really like U.S. Fish and Wildlife conservation easements. These easements protect our most important natural resources, but it also gives the landowner a little bit of flexibility on areas that are already converted or improved or already under agricultural land use. This gives U.S. Fish and Wildlife the ability to leverage funds. This stretches our dollars, and our decision makers also like that. So this is a smart use of taxpayer dollars. And this brings an increased attention to a landscape that desperately needs it. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife might not always bring the most funding to the table, but an established federal conservation area brings with it a level of importance where we are able to target other federal funding, other state funding, other grant funding to this region. So it becomes almost like this target or focal area where we can really direct funding to the region and maximize our conservation footprint. So that federal designation brings increased attention to this area. Any fee simple purchases will have a recreational component. U.S. Fish and Wildlife allows hunting and fishing on national wildlife refuges. So any lands that are purchased fee simple will allow for hunting and fishing. This complements our state efforts with rural and family lands in Florida Forever. And it provides another mechanism to protect our most important conservation lands in the region. And I'll finish with, if we want to protect these most important areas, and we all know our window is short here in Southwest Florida, we're being developed rapidly. It's going to take a multi-agency partnership to work together to leverage resources and get this done. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
All right, thank you, Julie. Are there any questions or comments regarding this topic?
I'll comment. Julie, great presentation. I heard U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service present as well. This is extremely exciting, and it provides many of our coastal counties have land acquisition programs that they can leverage with the state, not so much with the NRCS, but this I think is potentially very helpful, and I've said this before at some of the hearings, in our rural counties where they don't have the financial wherewithal to develop their own programs. And I didn't know, but I'd love the knowing that FWC manages the fee-owned lands that are within the conservation area, different than a wildlife refuge. So where that's the Fish and Wildlife Service managing, I just think it provides so many more opportunities. I'm hoping the landowners will just flock as they are flocking to Florida forever and the rural and family lands. Getting more money here is just going to be terrific. So thank you for all the work you've done.
Sure, thanks. And I think you brought up something when you mentioned the rural counties, and we've been doing U.S. Fish and Wildlife, because of their protocols are not, they have to wait till something is announced before outreach can be done. We've been trying to do quiet outreach behind the scenes to county commissioners, county administrators, so people weren't taken by surprise. But I do want to encourage anyone that wants to learn more or understand more to reach out, and we're happy to sit and meet with them. And I want to reiterate, this is willing seller, non-regulatory, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife is very cognizant of county plans and county goals within those counties, and so we want to be especially sensitive to that in the rural counties and work with them. So I would just want to encourage anyone to reach out, and we're happy to talk.
And I'll just also say that it is really important in educating the landowners and particularly our members here and part of the whole CHNEP network. This is not regulatory. So many people are afraid it's of the Fish and Wildlife Service. They think that that it's going to be something much more. This is a positive, and so the more that we can get the word out to our communities, I think it's a really, again, a opportunity for landowners to have just more options, as Julie said.
Right. Thank you. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie, for those comments. And I agree with Debbie. I mean, I think there's some apprehension too with municipalities, counties, commissioners to take land and put it into conservation because they fear that the tax revenue is going to change. But if we can alleviate those fears and better the environment by having more green space in the community, then this is definitely a win-win. So is there any other comments?
A question related to that. I know from prior experience, I don't know what Fish and Wildlife Service does in Florida and in conservation areas where they have easements. Many of the federal agencies pay PELT, payments in lieu of taxes. So in many cases, the federal agencies recognizing they will actually negotiate some sort of payment to rural counties for that loss of property tax. It generally isn't much, particularly with conservation easements, because they still have the houses, and that's where most of the taxes is. These rural lands are already in ag assessment or green belt, and so the loss is not significant. But from my experience, Fish and Wildlife Service is a fabulous partner for local communities.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. And I think, Debbie, when you talked about payment in lieu of taxes, that's something that U.S. Fish and Wildlife does. Again, as you said, it's not enough, and that's something we're looking at how we can supplement that. And there is a sensitivity to rural counties in this region because of the loss of a tax base. So that is something that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recognizes needs to be addressed, and we're currently exploring how can that be supplemented to make folks more whole. Thanks, you all.
Thank you, Julie. Much appreciated. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for those questions and discussion topics. So next,
so we have our CHNEP updates with regards related to this topic. Actually, As Julie mentioned, there was a public comment period for the scoping process. So CHNEP attended some of those meetings. CHNEP staff on behalf of the partnership as a whole attended some of those meetings and actually provided a comment letter for that to be taken into account during that public scoping process, because as we've talked about CHNEP, the partnership part of the strategic plan has already built out what is recommended for our area. And in that letter, we emphasized as well, basically that this plan is built by the partnership, which means all of the counties within the CHNEP area, all of the agencies, NGOs. And so this plan was built with their agreement and with their blessing. So we included that in the letter. And we wanted to also ask at the end that maybe Julie can give us some more information about how we can, what are the specific asks of the CAC afterwards. You know, maybe there's some educational resources that we can disseminate out through you all and your networks with regards to this, especially when we're talking about, you know, what this means for, you know, landowners and what this means for the area. Just some great public education campaign. I think that as CAC members that we can be helping with that. And then if there is a time for public comment, anything that's provided by Julie to us, we will disseminate it out through you all and provide to you all for your networks as well.
Great.
So yeah, if you have anything like that, feel free to put it in the chat, and then we can also send a follow-up email out through CHNEP. So yeah, with that being said, yep, we're asking you all to support this through your respective communities and organizations. I don't know if everybody noticed those maps that Julie was sharing greatly overlap with the CHNEP program area. And I'm going to show you a few of those here. Okay, so this is actually a copy of the letter, but I have some maps on the next slide. So as I mentioned, we have our strategic plan, and Harry listed the item in the strategic plan at the beginning of this that this whole topic relates to for the CHNEP. But also the CHNEP built a habitat restoration needs plan a few years ago with the guidance again of all of you all and all of the members from our counties and our agencies to look at habitat preservation and conservation, as well as connectivity and management, sustainability and resiliency throughout our area. We identify in that plan preservation, conservation, and reservation opportunities, as well as opportunities for management enhancement targets in each area. Those are, so basically it kind of divvies up areas that are under public ownership as targets for continuing to manage and enhance those lands, and then any areas that are under private ownership as opportunities when there are willing landowners to acquire those or put conservation easements on those. So we provided those maps in the letter. We're also going to provide some of the GIS to Julie and some of the planners on that. And again, as I mentioned, this plan was developed in partnership with the representatives throughout the CHNEP agencies, counties, and cities. And we're hopeful that this will help be a great resource to those when they're putting together that LPP, as Julie mentioned. And I just wanted to share with you all again some of those maps so you can really see how those maps overlap with some of the service area that from Julie's slides. Again, this is the map of those preservation conservation opportunities. Those are lands that are not already developed. We removed that from our consideration of this plan because obviously we need to be realistic, strategic, and opportunistic with what is acquired or what is managed. We also understand that, again, economies need to continue to grow. People need places to live. So this plan was built with that in mind. And so we had preservation conservation opportunities on native and non-native lands identified in that map. These were basically, you know, it's very much in line with the work of the CHNEP. Opportunities where federal, state, local land acquisition and easement programs can invest to save priority habitats. This would potentially expand restorable lands, expand existing preservation and conservation lands into larger ecosystem units, establishing major wildlife corridors within the region and waterway corridors, moving towards more landscape level protection. And then this slide and the next one, I'm just going to point out some of the things we emphasized in our technical comment letter that we provided. So first, we pointed them to the existing habitat restoration needs plan. And, you know, overall, the CHNEP as a whole does support this. It's likely that we'll be writing a letter on behalf of the CHNEP in support of this. because it does fall in line with, again, our strategic plan and our habitat restoration needs plan. We also asked that the service note that prioritize federally endangered species habitats and corridors and essential habitat corridors. That's that map on the bottom right. And then we also asked that they look at prioritization for areas with the least potential protection mechanisms. So as Debbie basically just mentioned, all of those areas and the coastal counties, some of the coastal counties do have some acquisition programs already. So, and those are lands that are identified or acquired through those programs in the yellow, but everything that's in the blue does not have a program that's identified those lands. We've identified it through our project, but there's no one actively working to acquire those lands, but those were identified as priority areas through our plan. So that would be something to focus on. We asked that they prioritize areas of unique and dwindling habitats. We did a habitat trend analysis, a change analysis throughout the CHNEP area as part of our project. And we looked at just, what habitats have been lost throughout the years. And again, this is just in more recent years within the CHNEP area. So isolated wetlands, upland coniferous forests, pine scrub, and salt marshes are areas that are under great threat. And we've lost a lot of that, provided some of that information in our letter. And we also asked that they look into prioritizing areas within coastal habitats that are impacted by sea level rise that will likely be pinched out against development and open water if they're not reserved or set aside so that they aren't developed. This would give, for instance, salt marsh a place to migrate to as sea levels move up. Salt marshes are going to move upslope and upstream, but if they are pinched out against development, they have nowhere to go, and we would likely lose what we have left in the CHNEP area. And so with that, I just wanted to, inform you all, we did provide a technical comment letter. This work is so important, and it really falls in line with a lot of the emphasis of the CHNEP. And I wanted to throw it to Jennifer or Julie, if you all had any additional comments on this.
This is Jennifer. I would just say that I threw the link to the letter in the chat. So for those of you who are interested, it is available at the chnep.org website, and there's a link in the chat directly to it.
Okay, I appreciate all this, and I would just like to say, anyone that has additional comments or information they'd like to share, please reach out to me. It's not a formal public comment period, but we will be developing this, and I would love to hear from you. So I really appreciate that information.
The flyer, the one-page flyer that is on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service site is a really great, and actually, Julie, you provided an updated one that was even better. I know we handed it out at the joint Sarasota Manatee Cattlemen's Association, and the landowners were extremely interested. So I think that it's something that's easy to hand out. And so, Julie, it may be useful to make sure that we have the link to download that as well.
Sure, I'll share. I'll share an updated link for you all with messages, maps, etc., that people can use when you're doing your own outreach in the region.
That would be really helpful. Thank you. And anything you pass along to us, we're happy to pass along to the CAC. And
Great.
Thank you all again for sharing this out through your networks.
Yeah, thank you. That would be great to have. And thanks for posting the letter, to the link to the letter. Any last minute discussion, questions, comments? If not, we can.
I would just say that, I'm super excited. I know many of you are too, that this has gotten traction again and is moving forward, and whatever we can collectively do in the CHNEP partnership to support this, we should be doing to really elevate this and show that community support. And so that's why we wanted to bring this to the CAC, because you're our boots on the ground. You work and live in these communities, and we need to get the word out, and we need to get more public support behind this if it's going to actually happen. So hopefully each of you on this call will take some action to kind of reach out to your own networks and spread the word about this, and send in comment letters. Like Julie said, even though public comment isn't officially open, I mean, it doesn't hurt to continue to send emails and letters. And there will be another commenting period. And I guess, Julie, I just wanted to ask you on that. What do people need to do to prepare for that second commenting period? They need to get on a subscription. I know there's like a subscribe button somewhere on the service site where you can subscribe for updates. Is there anything else you can recommend
Yeah,
for people to stay engaged?
yeah, I would email that link. You know, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has a link on their website, so you can go to U.S. Fish and Wildlife website on Southwest Florida Conservation Area, and you can also reach out to me, and I will make sure that you are on a list that U.S. Fish and Wildlife, you know, keeps updated. So I would probably do both. And then Florida Conservation Group and the Refuge Association will be conducting outreach throughout the summer to landowners and other stakeholder communities. So if you would like to be involved or made aware of those efforts, please reach out. We've had several meetings with landowners, NGOs, sportsmen, not all together, but you know, at different times, and we'll be continuing to do that so people are educated on this and can provide support. And I think it's really important. The deadline is gone, but I think, as you said, still reach out. This does overlap with CHNEP's area, and I think providing as much support as people can is very, very important. So thanks, Jennifer. So I'm going to be sending, I can't be here this afternoon, but I will be sending you all, I'm resending you all that Dropbox link and maps, etc., just so you have that. And that link also will include messages that we're encouraging people to use when reaching out to the communities that you all work with. And those messages are what, you know, we basically just talked about, but non-regulatory, willing seller, optionality, complement state efforts. Those are the big ones.
Yeah, thank you for sending that. And I also just, again, dropped in chat a link to the Fish and Wildlife Service webpage that's on this, that has a lot of resources as well. So people can get into that right away and start perusing all the resources there that they can use in their outreach.
All right, thanks you all. And look for, I'm going to email you something in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Julie.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.